Let's all welcome Congressman Johnson, Congressman Crist, and Governor Gregoire.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
And thank you both for joining us. I thought for everybody's interest, we might start with you, Congressman Johnson, and just how the caucus actually began.
Yeah, thanks so much. So we had a freshman retreat right after our election last January 2017. And it's become the custom for the new members of Congress to go away to Colonial Williamsburg. They've done it for the last several years. On our train ride there with all of our families and some of our staff and media following along, it was a few days after our oath of office, it began to snow, and we literally got snowed into the hotel, the resort at Colonial Williamsburg. So we saw very little of the surrounding area, but lots of each other. And it turned into sort of like a summer camp experience because we were literally closed into the hotel together. So that actually turned out to be a great thing because we bonded very well as a class. There are 55 members of our freshman class at the time, Republican and Democrat from coast to coast, all the states. And we had this session at the last day as the snow began to melt. They said we could get on the trains and go back. And someone called an audible, and they said, you know what, let's have a members-only session. So all staff, all media, everyone, even family members left the room. It was just the 55 of us in a U-shaped table setting, and we had a very frank discussion, sort of our parting comments of the retreat. And what struck me and Charlie and the rest of us was that every single member, regardless of their political persuasion, where they were on the political spectrum, virtually everyone said almost the same thing. They said, I'm sick of the tone of politics in our nation and in Washington, and you know what, I really would like to do this differently. When I committed to run for office, I wanted to do this differently. And it struck me that everyone said basically the same thing in their own way, in their own words. So after we got back to our offices, I was compelled to go and write a document. I wanted to summarize this. Sort of as a contract that we might make with one another. So I drafted this document called the Commitment to Civility. I summarized in one page the sentiments that everyone expressed, and then I sheepishly presented that to all of our classmates. And to my great delight, 53 out of 55 members signed on. Charlie was among the most enthusiastic and helped lead this effort. And that was sort of our freshman class project. So everyone signed this agreement, basic summary of principles that everyone in this room would agree with. Simple stuff, that we treat one another with dignity and respect, that we encourage productive dialogue, that we not view the person on the other side of the table as an enemy, but rather as our fellow colleague, fellow American. Basic, simple stuff, following the golden rule, sort of. After Steve Scalise got shot in the tragedy last summer, the lack of civility in our national politics reached national consciousness. And everyone understood now that it's leading to physical violence. And so some leaders in the House, in leadership, both sides said, why don't y'all make that freshman class project Congress-wide? And so we began to do that. So as of, I think last week, we have over 120 signatures on the commitment now. And leaders and luminaries from both sides, from Kevin McCarthy, Majority Leader, to legendary civil rights leader John Lewis, big names, big people who live these values. And we're encouraging this on an individual basis, going person by person. The interesting thing about it is everyone who's signed, these are not the people you see on TV hurling epithets and throwing chairs in committee meetings and that kind of thing. Everyone's acting like an adult. I'm the father of 4 children, as was mentioned in my bio. I teach my children to treat others with dignity and respect. The very least we should demand of our elected officials is the same. So that was the idea behind it.
Great, thank you. And Congressman Crist, you've taken it one step further to a national day. Can you talk with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I thought it was such a great idea. Why not make a national day, and designated July 12th to be that day, a national day of civility. And, like Mike said, I mean, the idea is not, earth-shattering. It might appear that way in today's political environment, but it's just about common decency and treating each other with respect. And as Mike said, literally following the golden rule. I wear this wristband every day. It was given to me during my campaign in the fall of 2016 by a local physician in St. Petersburg, which is my hometown. And all it says is practice the golden rule every day. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. And these things are not really complicated, as Mike said. It's pretty straightforward. It's very simple, but it's not put into practice enough. And so, we thought mutually, and with our freshman class and now the Congress as a whole, to have over 120 people sign on, that's quite a few out of 435. And I can tell you, as Jim mentioned in the introductory remarks about having been a governor, you have to work across the aisle, as we all know as governors. And we in Congress need to do the same thing. I mean, if you really want to get something done, you have to work with people of all different stripes in order to be able to accomplish things. And you have to realize that you have to compromise and be willing to compromise. You all know that. But it's good, I think, to have it actively produced and promoted in the United States Congress. The thing I heard the most as I was campaigning and going door to door in 2016, I heard a lot. I'm a Floridian. I heard a lot about Social Security. I heard a lot about Medicare, a lot about the environment. But the comment I got most consistently, Christine, was, Charlie, if you win, go up there and work together. Work together for the good of the country and the people of our country, and try to set an example. And that's what we're trying to do. And hopefully we'll have more success as time passes.
So, we could all sit back in our respective states and say it's all because of Congress. But we don't buy that, because we have problems with respect to civility back in our own home states. But we have speculated about what happened in Congress. It wasn't this way, a decade ago. So what's the source of it? And we have speculated that in times past, Congress had much more interaction on a personal level. They got to know each other. They became friends. So it really wasn't something they were inclined to do on the floor. But can you folks shed some light on your thinking about why Congress is as it is today, in many, not all, but many, not necessarily signing up to the caucus and the pledge to civility?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. The way that the schedule is run now, so many of us, still live at home in our districts. I have a wife and 4 children, and so I race back there as quickly as I can as soon as we're done with work. And they tell us that in the old days, that wasn't the case, that most people lived here, and so they fraternized on the weekends, and they got to know one another, and their families got to bond more than we have the opportunity to do that now. And so I think that may be a big part of it. It was part of the impetus for us starting the Honor and Civility Caucus, just that we launched in December, because we want to try to forge those relationships and develop those more, have events that are not political, but that everyone's invited to, and that we come to mutual agreement and understanding. We had an event at Mount Vernon in February, and had a great turnout there, persons across the spectrum, leaders from both sides. Those kinds of things are important because it is about relationship at the end of the day, and I think that is one of the things that's lacking.
I couldn't agree more. Socializing is an important part of life, and having the opportunity to visit with one another, dine with each other, and have those sort of informal engagements, I think is critical to fostering better relationships and trust. And it really comes down to trust. And it's a little challenging because there's 2 sides of the aisle, obviously. Elections are coming up in about 6 months. And so you realize that kind of competitive spirit exists throughout the Congress. But as Mike has said it, forging those friendships with people on the other side of the aisle is incredibly important. The Republicans are in the majority. And so in order to get things accomplished, you must work with the majority party. And I've learned that, and we've had success in doing so. Things may change after November, they may not, time will tell. But having those relationships already established gives us an open avenue to be successful for the people that we were elected to serve. Those people back in St. Petersburg and Clearwater, they're my boss. I work for them, they pay me, I'm grateful, so do you. And it's important, I think, for all of us to serve with a servant's heart, and understand that it's our job to not only do what our title says, represent, and what our title is, which is kind of unique. And so I think it's important that those relationships continue to grow, and we have more opportunities to have informal settings together rather than just in the committees. I thought it was odd when I first got here, and I went into my Financial Services Committee, which I am serving on, and all the Republicans are on one side and all the Democrats are on the other. And I thought we had given up segregation a long time ago. And I think it would be healthy for us to mix it up even in our committee settings. So maybe after the elections we can work on that too.
Governor, a mentor of mine told me one time, it's hard to hate someone if you know the names of their children. So the idea is that you build relationships, which builds understanding, which builds empathy. And you understand that even if someone's arguing the polar opposite position on a matter of policy or a piece of legislation, they're genuinely doing, in almost every case, what they believe to be the right thing for the country. Now, you may think it's completely wrong-headed, but you can never question those motives. And if we get beyond that, then I think it helps build understanding across the aisle.
Well said. We've had a debate about what the role of the media is. And we talk a lot about, okay, how do you get your colleagues to take seriously what you're trying to accomplish when, if they say something outrageous, they get the attention through the media and so on and so forth. Thoughts with respect to that?
You go first.
Sure. Well, Jim said it in the beginning too about, we each watch different networks, and it tends to be the case. For whatever reason, that's kind of evolved, and that's where we are. And the media certainly has a role in all of this. The whole country has a role in this. And, when you watch Fox or MSNBC or CNN or whatever the outlet is that you choose, you'll see different people that'll show up as guests frequently on those particular networks. And the reason they get there is because they say things that are probably a little flamboyant. And it's all about ratings. I mean, let's be candid. And so, it's many of the reasons people go to a football game or go to a NASCAR race. They want to see the hit or they want to see the crash. This is no different, I think, unfortunately. But I can tell you, when I share with people back home what our freshman class has done in having this group that really promotes civility and decency and kindness, they're stunned. And they said, well, I've never heard about that in the media. And I said, yeah, that's right, I know that. And but I want to give them hope. And the notion that there is a freshman class in the United States Congress who believes that being civil is very important. Mm-hmm. And it shocks them, and it makes their heart sing. Because all of us are hopeful about the future of this great country. And there's no better place on the planet to live and to grow up and to have a family. And we're the most powerful, richest nation on the face of the earth. And so the idea that, people in this Congress are dedicated to being kind, to being decent, to being civil, should be a hopeful thing. And I think we need more hope and less bluster.
Some people perceive civility and the commitment to be civil as a sign of weakness, and it's exactly the opposite, of course. It's easy to take cheap shots. It's much harder to defend your core principles in a civil manner. It's ultimately more productive, however, All of us are fighting for our core principles. We compromise preferences often. We never compromise our core principles, and the people that sent us here would not have us do that. We're fighting every day, but we're trying to be winsome warriors. And at the end of the day, it's the goodness of America that makes us great, as has always been observed through history. We're trying to preserve that. And again, I have to go home and look into the eyes of my 4 children, and I'm responsible for my own actions. I can't control what everybody else does, but I can control my own actions. That's what I teach my children. I should be doing the same thing.
By the way, that was always my test. If I go home, will my children be proud of me and what I've said and what I've done? And I wish that was the test for everyone. Before I open up to questions, yes.
It just reminded me, Mike, of a quote from Ronald Reagan when you were talking about kindness. He said pretty famously, never confuse kindness with weakness. And you're right, it's harder to be kind for some people. Hopefully for a lot of us it comes naturally. That would be good. But it is easy to sort of lash out. And a lot of people in the political world, or a fair amount, understand that appearing on television, appearing on cable stations is an important part of that endeavor. But it really doesn't have to be. And it takes discipline, it takes restraint in order to not feed into that and get carried away in it.
Thank you. So I want to open it up to questions, but I want to ask one last question of you folks on behalf of the 6 Govs. And that is, this day is not for us one day. We hope that this will put behind what you're doing and what others around the country would like to see done, that this ought to be how we do business on a regular basis. That I can tell you, going through one of the worst recessions in history, it was all about working together for the good of the state and the good of the country. So we're now at the end of all of this going to talk about what do we do next? How do we help you and how do we help the country understand that civility is really the key to success? What recommendations would you make to us?
I had occasion to go back to my home state legislature about a week ago. It's the first time I'd been back since I got elected to Congress. It's a tradition in the Louisiana legislature to give a swan song farewell address. I never got a chance to do it. So the speaker, I was down there for other reasons. The speaker allowed me to come to the podium, and I didn't have prepared remarks because I didn't know I was going to have the opportunity. The first thing that came to me was this topic. And so in the Louisiana legislature right now, as in many states, there's a lot of acrimony. It's, bitter partisan divide, and the agenda on both sides is stalled because people seemingly cannot get along and even agree on simple things. And so I challenge my colleagues to have dialogue about this, to first not neglect the relationships in that room, because there's an intimacy in a state house that you don't really get even in Congress or other bodies, and put the acrimony aside and work together for the best interest of the state. I mean, it's as simple as having dialogue about it. That was the impetus behind Charlie's idea on the bill that we co-sponsored to create a National Day of Civility, to have people talk about this and share their ideas, much like we're doing this morning. We need more of this, so that it filters down to the next generation. That's my great concern, Governor, is that the people coming behind us, they're watching all the bad behavior, and that has become their model. And there's some real concern about that. So they have to see grown-ups acting like grown-ups, and we do that by sparking the conversation, I think.
I would agree, and I think maybe this will sound a little corny, but I think each and every one of us, you're all leaders in your community, or you wouldn't be here. And people are persuaded by how you comport yourself, and how you speak, and how you treat other people, and they witness that. And so I think the best way to keep this going is for each and every one of us to take it upon ourselves to conduct ourselves in a decent manner, in a humane fashion, to impress upon other people that everybody matters. When you're governor, it's a big deal. And I can remember while serving as governor of Florida, people would say to me, it's great to have your chief of staff working for you and, your legislative director or whatever. And I said, they don't work for me. I said, they work for the people of Florida. And that's true. I think that little things like that matter, and they make a difference. And when you have a podium as a governor, or as a representative, or as a business leader, or whatever your endeavor might be, a mom, a dad, you have influence, whether you know it or not, and especially our young people. And I'm encouraged to see that you're here. What Mike said is very important, that the next generation being exposed to so much of harsh comments and maybe taught to act that way, need to see the counter. It's always darkest before the light, and it's going to get light.
Thank you. So let me open it up to questions from the audience. Please.
As both of you... Sorry. Hi, my name is Pierce Haley. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm here with the School for Ethics and Global Leadership. As both of you have mentioned, it's extremely important for members of Congress and legislators at the state level to engage in civil discourse, practice respect, and work together. But when it comes down to it, Democrats and Republicans have objectively different views on the majority of the issues discussed on the Congress floor. How can our elected representatives work together while also holding true to the promises that they made to their supporters?
So my background's in constitutional law, and I'm one of those nerdy guys that reads history. And the idea behind a republic is that you would have very different viewpoints come together and coming from different points of view and arm wrestle over the compromise that is the best public policy for the most people. So it almost presupposes a sort of jousting, because that's what makes us better. Iron sharpens iron, as Scripture says. So the dialogue and the vigorous debate is fine. In fact, I think it's healthy and necessary for a successful republic. The question is, how do we argue, right? We're not saying we shouldn't fight over fight for our principles, but it's how we fight. I'll tell you, one member of our freshman class, who shall remain unnamed, did not sign the commitment to civility, and two didn't sign. But this one in particular, I brought this to this person and said, "Here, add your name," and they said, "No, I don't want to do that." And I said, "Oh, okay, why? Because you're like the only one." And they said, "Because I came here to fight." I said, "Well, okay, so did I. We're not saying we're not going to fight. It's how we fight, right?" So approaching the debate in the right spirit is a big part of this. And if you begin with that common understanding that you're not going to take it personal, it's about the policy, not the person, I think that's the best way to start it.
I'll take a little bit of a different approach. Is it Pierce, did you say? I don't think our differences are that great. I think that, who among us doesn't want a clean environment? Who among us does not want a good education for our children? Who among us would wouldn't enjoy lower taxes, rather? So I think a lot of the main goals are very similar. I think where the differences may reside is how do you get to those goals and how do you accomplish them? And the methodology may be a little bit different. But I think when you realize that, most Americans are pretty much down the middle. Where you see the fringe, I think, is sometimes in Congress or on cable television. But I think most Americans really hope for the same kind of things in the long run. Safety, a strong national defense. These are not really complicated nor terribly disagreeable goals. And I think once you realize that, then you can have civil discussions about different ways to achieve those goals without having acrimony. And I think that's what we're striving for here. Great question, though.
As a governor, I share the view of these two congressmen, and let me just say, you don't get good public policy without robust debate, and that's really what it's about. But in the process of that robust debate, there is absolutely no need to personalize, degrade, and disrespect your colleague who happens to disagree with whatever position you may be taking. So, great question, thank you. Other questions, y'all? In the back.
Hi, my name is Cormac Thorpe. I'm from New York City, and I'm also here with the School for Ethics and Global Leadership. So social media is one of the main ways young people in America, and I guess most Americans at this point, get their news. So how do you suggest people should break out of their bubbles on social media? Because oftentimes you get a lot of the news that maybe social media thinks you want, so you're often surrounded by a lot of the stuff that maybe isn't from the other side. So how do you suggest people break out of their bubbles, and how can you encourage people to do that?
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, if
Congressman,
I might.
please.
What I always try to tell people and encourage them to do is to get their news from as many different sources as possible. I love reading the newspaper. I'm 61 years old, so that's kind of how I was raised. But I pay attention to social media. I watch different cable channels, and I try to make sure that the sources that I'm getting news from are diverse, and that I am not in a bubble. And that's not always easy, but that's what I would encourage people to do in order to break out of it, is to try to expose yourself to as many different news and media outlets as humanly possible.
And wean yourself off of social media. It would be nice. It's a difficult thing. We control our children's time. That they're I have teenagers, and they would be on it 24/7 because that's the culture. That's the way it is. So as parents, I think that's an important thing for us to kind of I think push with our kids, and then hopefully we can all keep it within measure, as Charlie's saying.
The truth be known, we should probably ask you that question, but can I just say that one of the best things I think I ever did as governor is always, always, always try to tune in to what others who disagreed with me were saying, so that I could understand, really listen and understand their point of view. Because again, out of that comes better public policy than just sitting in your own little vertical silo and debating with people who are of like opinion and like mind. Right here, ma'am?
Morning. Stacy Bridges, Veterans Vision. I had two questions. One was, what role does the Fairness Doctrine Act play in the divisiveness of the news that we're seeing now, Republican versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal? Have you ever thought about overturning that rule? Because when it was instated, it was to stop the propaganda that we see today after World War II. And my second question is, what role has Citizens United played in the divisiveness of Republican versus Democrat? Are you guys fighting for your policies, or you're fighting for PAC money?
I'll take a stab at the second part. What causes the divisiveness? Citizens United, I think, has played a role. By having unlimited corporate dollars thrust into the political process. Money comes into it from, whatever the sources may be, but I think that's a particularly distasteful one. I would identify, maybe even more so, the reason for divisiveness in our country to gerrymandering. My state's a good example. In 2015, the Florida Supreme Court declared that the districts in Florida were unconstitutionally gerrymandered in favor, in that case, of the Republican Party, and reconfigured the districts in my state. And it really brought about, I think, more middle-of-the-road candidates like myself that are, sort of down the middle. And, one of the concerns that members of Congress have is being primaried. And so if they're not quite radical enough on the right or the left, there is that concern among a lot of the membership, not all of it, but an awful lot. And I know that the U.S. Supreme Court, you referred to a case, there is a Wisconsin case on gerrymandering before the United States Supreme Court now. And depending on how they rule, could have a profound impact on the issue of how congressional seats are established and set up, and whether they are hard right or hard left, or more so, kind of down the middle type seats, which would create a more down the middle type Congress, I think.
I'll just say quickly, there may be a number of contributing factors to the polarization of our politics, and we may all agree or disagree on what those are. And I'm on the conservative end of the spectrum politically, but it's more important at the end of the day, no matter where we are on the spectrum, to be principled. I mentioned I was a constitutional law attorney and litigator in my background, and so I'm a big advocate of free speech. And I don't think that we want to be advocates for censoring and silencing viewpoints that we disagree with. As we tell young audiences often, I spoke at a college last week on this topic, that the price of free speech is that sometimes we have to be exposed to viewpoints that we may disagree with, But that's kind of the beauty of America. It's sort of the beauty of the free marketplace of ideas, and if we begin to sort of blockade the free market, it's not really the free exchange. And so, there's a lot of concern about it, but I think we ought to be very careful about, advocating for censorship, because at the end of the day, I don't think it serves any of our purposes or I think the beauty of what America is all about.
Thank you. We've run out of time. I want to thank you both for spending this very valuable time with us this morning. And even more so, thank you on behalf of the Bipartisan Policy Council and the governors for what you're doing on this subject, and for your commitment to public service and to the betterment of our great country. So if you would join me in thanking our two guests. Thank you, guys.